Hello, everybody, and welcome to Thane Brain, a new podcast where I discuss the inner machinations of my mind.
The inner machinations of my mind are an enigma.
Words from my brain going directly into your ears. This is going to be an unscripted, but not unedited podcast. I'm doing this for a couple of reasons. The first is that I want to boost my confidence speaking off the cuff like this. I have a lot of trouble voicing my inner thoughts, even though I talk to myself a lot. So hopefully doing a more casual thing like this, where I'm not referencing the words that I've written, will make it more comfortable for me to do more stuff like this in the future. And the second is that I need another sort of creative outlet. And don't get me wrong, I love doing the main channel still. Video games are and always have been my number one passion, so that's not stopping anytime soon. The problem is those types of videos take so long to make, and if you're a creator yourself, you can understand where I'm coming from. You know, I've been doing it for so many years, almost a decade now. Semi-regularly, I try to upload once a month, but lately I've been kind of falling off of it, and I want to get back on track and create things and, put my perspective out into the world. So, in theory, this will be a faster way of doing that. They should be simpler to make. What I want to talk about today is a very important topic to me because it's something I've lived with for over half of my life now. I'm 30 years old, and I have struggled with this particular mental ailment for really as long as I can remember. So let's talk about obsessive compulsive disorder. I am constantly dealing with this. There is no real break from it. There is relief sometimes, but it just never goes away. I live with it. It is a part of me. And of all the afflictions, in the past, I've been diagnosed with PTSD, and also very recently, I had a late diagnosis of ADHD and level 1 ASD, that's autistic spectrum disorder. But how my brain works, my mental afflictions, OCD is the hardest for me personally. And if you're someone from the outside listening in, you may be wondering, why is that so bad? You have OCD, don't you just like to be organized? And to that I say, you are misinformed, my friend. I hear very often, I'm talking multiple times a week, coworkers, customers at my job, just people I'm interacting with on a regular basis. And they'll very casually just throw out the phrase, I am so OCD about blank. You'll have someone tidying up a messy stack of papers on their desk and saying, oh, I'm sorry, I'm OCD. But the only person who could be potentially offended by that is someone like me who is an OCD sufferer. You have to be in the club, so to speak, to understand why that could be perceived as hurtful. Because I know it's just a constant reminder that OCD is so downplayed. It is just, let's take the biggest stereotype of OCD and turn it into a synonym for perfectionism. If you've used that phrase in the past, I don't blame you, right? You hear it from somebody else and then you want to use it yourself. I understand how it spreads so easily. But it's interesting to compare it to something like, how, and this is an extreme example, back in the early 2010s, I want to say, people, at least online, would often use the phrase, this thing that I don't like is literally cancer. First of all, this can be perceived as offensive to a greater swath of people. Nobody questions the severity of cancer. Even if you don't have any family members who have been directly affected by cancer, you have a shared empathy. There is this global understanding that cancer is this serious thing. So both the person speaking the phrase and whoever they're telling it to are on the same page. However, with OCD, and again, I'm not trying to compare OCD to cancer. I am just making a language-based observation. With OCD, the person saying, oh, I'm so OCD, they're not doing it to be edgy. They're saying that because they genuinely don't understand what OCD is. That's the difference. And I hope that by telling my story, I would love it if fellow neurodivergent people come to this and can relate and it may help them moving forward. I really want a lot of neurotypical people to listen in and gain some insight about this condition that affects my daily life. So I think to help you best understand where it comes from, let's talk about my OCD villain origin story. Where did this come from? So let's rewind. Let's YouTube rewind.
Yeah, it's rewind time.
Back to, funnily enough, I think like 2006, which is around the time YouTube started. But let's rewind. I want to say to my middle school years. However, I know that I exhibited signs of OCD before then. Nevertheless, middle school is the time I really remember my obsessive compulsive thinking being a problem. This active presence in my life that would not go away from that point on. If you're unaware, OCD has different types. So two people clinically may have OCD, but they have entirely different theming. So let's get into it. The first theme I would say that I had was religious OCD. And I want to preface this by saying that my family definitely wasn't extremely religious or anything like that. I remember very occasionally going to church with my mom, but we weren't very strictly raised Christian or Catholic. I just happened to be very familiar with the idea of heaven and hell and the devil. I was actually, and some of you may remember this, I was affected directly by the satanic panic, and one of my family members threw away all of my Pokemon VHS tapes due to fear of them being demonic or containing subliminal messages. I'm certainly not saying that's what started the fear within me. I wasn't buying into that, not even back then. But that didn't change the fact that I still had a very real fear of the devil. I mean, it makes sense. He's depicted in a lot of different media, like cartoons, for example. The embodiment of evil. He's the ruler of the underworld, and if you do bad things and you die, your soul goes to hell, his domain, forever. It's an eternal punishment. And back then, I'll admit, I have a very black and white way of thinking about things, and to me as a kid, it's like you're either good or you're bad. I think humans are really very morally gray, but to me, it's like if I did enough bad things, then I would be sentenced to eternity in hellfire. And that thought was horrifying to me. That's the worst imaginable fate. You know, I had traumatic things happen to me as a child. We don't have to get into that. I don't precisely know what causes OCD. It is genetic, and I mean, my family on both sides have it. But regardless of how it happened, my brain thought that to be the perfect opportunity to attack. And so I would have intrusive thoughts. And intrusive thoughts is another term that's been very overused lately, when it really doesn't mean what people think it does. But here I am having real intrusive thoughts, and these are unwanted thoughts that surface, I think, due to fear. So I am afraid. I want my soul in the afterlife to be at peace, and it's a bit morbid for, a young child to be so concerned with what happens to his soul after death, but, that's just how I was. And so my brain wants to punish me, and so it feeds in an intrusive thought of, I love the devil. Just that simple but effective phrase that freaks me out, right? Why did I come up with that? Why did those thoughts appear in my head? I do not love the devil. And with that black and white thinking I mentioned, my perception of this scenario where I have, a thought coming into my head of, I love the devil, I'm panicking. Here I am doing a very wrong thing, thinking, I love the devil, when I definitely don't. It's so against my morals, what I want, that it's disturbing. And so I'm trying to think of ways to remedy this, right? And what I ultimately come up with is very common with OCD, and that is a counting ritual, essentially. So I had to say, I hate the devil and I love God. And it's not enough to just say it one time, because that first thought was so egregious, so distressing, I had to get rid of it. I had to banish it. I had to repent. And so I would say the phrase, I hate the devil and I love God. I hate the devil and I love God, over and over again until I reach some arbitrary number that feels safe. Okay, let's call it 20 times. Now imagine having to do that every single time you have an intrusive thought. Okay, so every time I think about the devil, and this is just common psychology, the more you actively try not to think about something, the more it surfaces in your head, right? This would come up again. And my brain would tell me, I love the devil. So I'd have to say, I hate the devil and I love God. I hate the devil and I love God again, repeatedly. And that is exhausting. My obsession is, I'm thinking about this bad thing. I am a bad person. I'm going to go to hell. And if I do nothing about it, I'm going to keep thinking that. I am going to be terrified. I'm going to have anxiety. And I'm sure I went to my parents and said that I was afraid of the devil, right? But I don't know that this is OCD. They don't know that it's OCD because I'm keeping it internally. I've come up with this solution, right, by myself. And that quote-unquote solution is a compulsion to say a certain thing to alleviate the anxiety. To say, okay, in God's eyes, I am now safe. My soul is clean, as it were. I have repelled this thing enough to a satisfactory degree that I can move on from it temporarily. But inevitably, it surfaces again. And it's a loop, just over and over and over again. This horrible cycle. This horrible cycle I couldn't escape from. And I didn't know what I was experiencing as OCD, right? So I'm not telling my parents, oh, I have OCD. I'm just a kid, right? I don't know the complexities of what's going on. I just think it's a normal thing. And I found a solution to, alleviate the constant anxiety that's surfacing. There is a magical thinking element to OCD. It is, if I say this thing a certain number of times to show my devotion to God, God will forgive me. And of course, that's not it. OCD, again, it feels like an attack of the brain. What else is this child afraid of? What else can we exploit to make him anxious? And so I started having thoughts of, I want my family to die. That is another disturbing thing. That is obviously one of the worst possible things that could ever happen. I do not want that. However, my brain was still feeding that line to me of, I want my family to die. And so, naturally, I would have to say the line, I don't want my family to die, I love my family. And I had to, again, say that an arbitrary amount of times until it is acceptable. And what am I doing there? The correlation is pretty clear with God, right? I am repeating myself that many times so that I may appease God. That makes a lot of sense. But, and I'll tell you this right now, even as an adult, I feel similarly. It's very superstitious, okay? Because I am afraid that by thinking I want my family to die, I am putting it out there into the universe that is something I want to have happen. I'm influencing. I am skewing the balance. Whatever cosmic force is out there making this happen, I am putting that into motion with my thoughts. And I was afraid that by thinking that, I would somehow cosmically be responsible for my parents' deaths. That they would die in a car crash or something. Is it irrational? Sure, yes, because it is an intangible thing. A feeling that you're going to cause your parents' death. And I want to make it very clear that this is not homicidal thinking. I'm not personally afraid that I am going to go and murder my parents. That is horrible. I am not personally capable of doing that. It is a thought that I will somehow cause it because of some force that is out of my control. But let me take control by making it right and saying the opposite thing, that I don't want them to die, I love them, X amount of times. As you can guess, as you can probably envision, this would be distressing for anybody. If every single time you had a thought like that, you had to say the opposite. And if you didn't, you try to just ignore it, well, ignoring it doesn't work. Because once I have that thought, I am severely concerned that I have darkness in my soul, that I am committing sin, I am doing wrong, and I need to mend that. I need to make that better. I need to correct it. And by ignoring it, I'm giving in to the quote-unquote dark temptation. I am giving into this idea that I am bad, my soul is bad, that I'm capable of having such thoughts, and I'm not doing anything about them. At least this is a way to mitigate that. That's a terrible thing for a kid to have to endure. And again, I'm not seeking help for this. It is just a very disruptive thing in my daily life that I am dealing with silently. And so I would talk to myself. That was a method of, coping with this thing I was going through. And then, now this is interesting, something happens where OCD takes hold of my brother as well. And I am not going to get into specifics. For my brother, that's his story to tell if he wants to tell it. So sorry, I'm not giving you much to go off of, but I want to make it clear that while for me, it was this very internal attack, and sometimes I'd have to say things again and again out loud. I could do it under my breath, I could do it very quietly, I could do it in another room, etc. It was easy for me to hide it. But with my brother's OCD theme, which was contamination and security, by the way, he had a lot more physical symptoms. His OCD presented in a much louder and more obvious way. Whereas I was struggling internally, not coming out with what I was going through, my brother didn't have a choice. And my parents were, of course, very concerned. But none of us, not even me, really knew how to handle it. And in fact, for a while, they rejected the idea that something was seriously wrong with him. They didn't like the thought of putting a label on this. And I get how hard that must be as a parent to admit, yes, my otherwise healthy child has this cognitive impairment. And even me, the older brother, who really should have been caring and supportive of this, I very regrettably just wasn't. I didn't know what was happening with him. I didn't recognize it as him also having OCD. I'm just seeing, oh, my brother is acting strangely. Let's pick on him. Let's laugh at it. And that's definitely not okay. But that was the reality. And my brother and I, we get along so well now. We bond over and talk about mental health a lot. I'm strictly saying back then, I was a little shithead. But it got to a point where an action had to be taken, and so he was brought to the hospital. And through working with doctors, they came to understand that yes, he does actually have this mental disorder, and it's called OCD. It was a learning experience for all of us. And actually, my dad himself, though he was skeptical about the whole thing, realized that he has OCD. And we've since talked about that. But that's just how it was. That's the first time I ever heard OCD. Obsessive compulsive disorder. That is what my brother is going through. He has a condition. He has been diagnosed with this condition. Now, with that in mind, I'm going through life. I'm just keeping it to myself. With everything going on with my brother, that was even more reason not to come out. And so I just internalized it. And I did this a lot with everything. My feelings, I would just push them, shove them down. I still do this as an adult. Let's think about that. And so going into high school, finally we go into high school and OCD thinking is wearing me down. Still dealing with a lot of problems that are worsening. And I talked to my English teacher who used to be a guidance counselor, right? And he says, well, what you're struggling with is anxiety and depression. Let's get you to see the current counselor. And so I did. We had a meeting, and eventually that turned into me going to therapy. And lo and behold, they diagnosed me with OCD. That makes sense. I can see it now. Wow, this is what my brother was going through. I can relate to him. And the more I learn about it, the more I research it. I'm looking around me and I'm recognizing, oh my goodness, my friend. Here's my friend who's muttering the same thing under his breath over and over again. He also has OCD. But I think due to a bit of an ableist mindset back then, or just not being comfortable with coming out with what I have, I never talked to him about it. And that's another deep regret of mine. Because of a variety of factors, I think, I struggled with bullies for a long time. It wasn't acceptable to be different, and so I kept it to myself, but, I still had these struggles, and so I didn't even talk to him about it. But here I am living with OCD, and today, for the longest time, and I don't know quite when this pivot took place, but in high school, I did start having physical symptoms, so I would have to tap things a certain number of times before I left a room. I would have to check and make sure that the door was locked again and again. And we're talking like I would walk halfway to my dad's house, turn around, check that I locked the door to my mom's house, that kind of thing. So I don't quite know when the transition took place, but at some point I started worrying about my cognitive performance. And I've always been self-conscious about what people think about me, like intellectually. I want people that I look up to and respect to think that I am competent and capable. I want to be seen as a quote-unquote smart person, even though that notion today is just so silly to me because there are so many things in this life that I am completely ignorant about. I have a lot of knowledge in the things that I'm very passionate about, but to try and appear smart to everybody you meet, it's really exhausting. And that was something that I was trying to do for a long time. And I started struggling with contamination OCD myself. Really, yes, while I was afraid of death and dying, what I was mostly concerned with was getting some sort of vague illness that would affect my cognitive ability. And part of it is that I just always want to be performing my best. I always want to put my best foot forward. And I was worried that somehow I would ruin that, right? I wanted to protect my mind, basically. And so I started fearing cleaning chemicals. Anytime disinfectant was sprayed, if you inhale that, it's incredibly bad for you if you breathe it in too much. I think this also stems from cigarette smoking, secondhand exposure to cigarette smoke. Because growing up, we'd have all these lectures, we'd have to watch these informational videos about how terrible cigarettes are for your health, and how just being around one can expose you to all these toxins they put inside the cigarette. So it was terrifying to me, and when an adult would smoke around me, I had to do this thing where I'd hold my breath and take sharp, quick inhales so I wouldn't breathe it in as much as possible. And it would get to the point where I'd cry. If I had to be in a situation where I was driving in a car with somebody who was smoking, I would cry my eyes out. Even as an adult, I'm still really wary of cleaning chemicals. Some people say, oh, you have contamination OCD. Your house, your apartment must be spotless. Your car must be so clean. And it's not really. It's me. My body is my temple. I want myself to be clean. If my surroundings aren't, if I touch something dirty, it's going to trigger me. But I'm okay with living in an environment that's not pristine. Does that make sense? And yes, this extends to, I would have contamination OCD about surfaces and germs and bacteria. Even as an adult today, I will not touch the crosswalk button with my bare hand. I know how many people touch that on a daily basis. I need to pick up a rock and use that rock to push the button with. And then, I can use the crosswalk as intended. I'm not going to kick it. Sometimes, I used to use my foot to flush public bathrooms, for example. But then I just imagine, the germs are on me. If I accidentally scrape my pant leg with the bottom of my shoe, then it's going to be on my pant leg. And then if I scratch that spot, it's going to be on my hands. Then I'm going to touch my face and it's going to get inside of me. That's the thought process. And again, yes, it's very irrational. And I know that the worst that's going to happen, I'll just get a stomach bug. But I'm afraid of these things, some fatal illness that I cannot recover from. I'm terrified of that. And even more than dying itself, and I'm just talking about the day-to-day as well. I'm also, and it's something else, is I'm also just afraid of the OCD cycle itself. I'm afraid of anxiety, and I think my brain is attached to it so long. I've had contamination OCD for over 10 years now, and I think my brain latched onto it for so long because it's an easy trigger, right? You have to pick up a pen off of that you dropped onto the floor. Oh, there you go. People are walking around with their filthy shoes on the carpet, which is a trigger for the compulsion of I have to wash my hands. And I've explained this before, but it is like an alarm going off inside of my head. It is a voice yelling with a very commanding presence that will not go away, telling me that something is very seriously wrong. And it's distracting. It's taking up brain space. It takes its toll on me. It's exhausting trying to push that back. Right? And I'm afraid of that distraction because I want to be a productive person. I have all these projects that I want to work on. I don't want the OCD negatively affecting me. I don't want it dragging me down, and yet it does. All this being said, it doesn't matter what the theme of OCD is. It's just the fact that I will always have intrusive thoughts. Because it's chronic. There's no cure for OCD. There are ways to alleviate it. There's ways to better handle it. And I am going to start going to therapy again. I am currently taking medication that's really been helpful after refusing medication for many years of my life. It doesn't matter what the theme of OCD is. It's just the fact that I will have an intrusive thought that brings me anxiety. And my brain will think that the solution is to perform a compulsion to alleviate it temporarily. And then it'll be a loop. Whether it's contamination, religious OCD, security. No longer do I have to say what is essentially a mantra again and again and again. But now it's progressed so that religious OCD is now just this general, spiritual, moral scrupulosity. The fear that I'm not always doing the right thing. Because I'm not saying that there isn't a God. And in fact, I do believe in the essence of God. I do believe that there is some higher power. I am terrified of karmic retribution, where I believe there is some force of nature, some sort of energy that decides our fates, and we can influence that. And because of that, I worry that if I do the wrong thing, my soul, I will not necessarily be sent to hell, but something like it, or that I'll be reincarnated into a worse life. You see, I'm more open-minded about spirituality and what happens to us after death. But the fact remains that it still terrifies me, right? And I know that being a good person is the most important thing. And so every day I try to be the best person I can be. So I may tell someone, I have moral OCD. And they may say, well, that's not a bad thing, right? You're compelled to do the right thing. You have a reason to do the right thing. And I agree. Yes, it has, it makes sure that I have a very strong moral compass that I will not deviate from. However, it affects the littlest of things that you wouldn't consider. And let me give you an example. So I'm a school photographer. So we have contracts with all these schools throughout Arizona. I'm going in and taking pictures. So I'll get through, if we assume it's 2 per, I'm taking 400 photographs of 200 subjects a day, right? Each and every one comes up through my line. And, it just depends on the school, but often we'll have a very strict deadline. We'll have to get out of the school at a certain time. Okay, so we're on a tight schedule. We have to follow to a T. We have to make sure we're getting these kids in and out. And so my job becomes a balance of taking a great picture, the portrait side, but also speed to appease the school itself in the moment. So that being said, the pictures that I take of a student, I try my best. I'm getting the best smile that I can from that student, but sometimes it's not enough, and it'll be in a bad expression, and I know that I can get a better one, but I will internalize that and I'll say, what have I done? I should have approached this a different way or said something else. And I'll think about it until the shift's over. And, sometimes the compulsion is so strong that I will go and get the kid back, even though, I pull a coworker over and they say, oh, that's not that bad. I've taken worse pictures today. Still, I will feel compelled to do this. And that is not good because it disrupts their class time just to satisfy my need to make things right. When, retake day exists, it's not the end of the world. There are so many factors that go into it. It's not my fault. I'm not choosing to take a bad picture of this kid. It's just occasionally something happens where it's not the best that it can be. But I feel responsible. The guilt will build up inside me, and it will seriously prevent me from sleeping at night. And so that's what it's like living with OCD. It affects every single facet of every day. I am constantly in a state of anxiety. The amount of stress that it's bringing me has decreased. The medication helps a lot, kind of just quiet down everything. And I've been more easily able to touch something that I perceive to be dirty and go about my day. I can continue on. Okay, but it's still always going to be a struggle. And it's like, sometimes it even affects, so it does affect my work, right? But it also affects my leisure time, my enjoyment at home. Okay, I can't tell you how many times I've went to play a video game and my brain convinces me that my controller needs to be cleaned. Like, oh, it fell onto the ground, it is now contaminated. And I'm trying to push back that thought. I know that's ridiculous. My own controller's not going to make me sick. It's not even visibly dirty. There's nothing wrong with it. Please, just quiet the overwhelming thought that this thing is going to hurt me. But it doesn't work. And so I've been through, whole gaming sessions. I'll play for an hour and I won't enjoy it to the fullest because I'll have this distracting thought that I'm trying to ignore. And that's why it's so much easier to just stop what I'm doing, go and clean the controller, wipe it down with like hydrogen peroxide or whatever, and then wash my hands because the outside of the container of the hydrogen peroxide is dirty. And then, okay, I'm good to go. But if I did that every single time with everything I thought was dirty, I would just be doing it nonstop. I wouldn't get anything done at all. So it's like I have to have something in my brain distracting me. So yes, again, I hope explaining what OCD is has been informative and maybe helpful to some of you who experience something similar. In future episodes, we'll talk about my ADHD and ASD, autism spectrum disorder, level 1 diagnoses, and how with those, of course, they do cause a lot of struggle in my life, but there are positive aspects to them. With ADHD, we're going to use another overused term, but hyperfixation, right? I can focus on something that I am passionate about. I can get totally absorbed in what I am doing. And I think that can make for a better end product as a result. I like the fact that I'm interested in going down these rabbit holes, and, with autism, I have this lifelong interest of video games, and that I can have encyclopedic knowledge and trivia about my favorite game series. But with OCD, there's really no benefit to having it. So it's like, again, I'm not saying that having OCD is worse. Like, it's called autism spectrum disorder for a reason. There are people with higher support needs. And I'm not saying that, those of us with ADHD have lesser struggles. What I am saying is that there can be positives, but with OCD, it really just feels like an impairment. The only nice thing I can say about having OCD is that I have much more empathy, sympathy, understanding for people with mental health disorders. I am a much kinder person overall in general because I suffer with OCD. It's the same thing with chronic physical pain, right? I know what migraines feel like. Some people don't have to live with that. But to me, there is no physical pain greater than a migraine. It is so intense that it is indescribable to someone who has never had a migraine headache. Because I have OCD, because I know what it's like to be anxious all the time, to be sad, to be depressed, I do feel that it has made me a better person as far as understanding of my fellow humans. I am much more caring and kind, and I don't think anyone should suffer like that. Maybe this is punishment for how bad I acted as a teenager. I can't help but have those thoughts. But because I have OCD, I am excellent at being stoic. Serious setbacks in life don't faze me as much because I'm always in defense mode. I always have my guard up. And it is not fun. In fact, a lot of the time, I'm miserable. I'm going to be completely honest with you. My experience in this world, I have good times. There's things to look forward to. There's things I love about living on this planet Earth in this day and age. But it's hard, and I don't want to sound ungrateful. This goes without saying, but there are people who suffer much worse than me, right? Yeah, I have a slew of mental health problems, but so do a lot of other people. And, maybe they can't hold down a job. They can't provide a shelter for themselves. They can't afford food. There's people in this world who don't have access to clean water. So I don't mean to sound ungrateful when I talk about how challenging it is, but I just need to get it off my chest. I want to talk about this and be more open about it. But I'm here. I'm doing it. I'm not, I've overcome a lot. There's been self-harm in my past. I've been suicidal, and I don't have that anymore. And yeah, I just want to create, because H. Bomber Guy once said this, but completing a project that you're really passionate about, that you want to get out there into the world, it is just such a relief. It is more than happiness. There are very few things that still make me happy. However, it is healing to the soul that I'm able to do things like this. So I want to make podcasts. I want to keep making videos. So I hope, let's get this out the door. And let me just reflect on how that went. So I did have a lot of pauses in between my speaking, and I can't help that. That's just how I am. So I will be editing this still quite a bit. I'm going to cut out those dead spaces. So what you're hearing is much smoother than how it actually went down. We're looking at nearly 2 hours of recording, so we'll see how much I might get an hour out of it. Honestly, that's how much I paused just to collect my thoughts and try to think of the right word to describe a certain thing. So I hope that was insightful if you weren't familiar with OCD and what it really truly is. I hope you now know and can maybe have more empathy for people dealing with this and similar type of mental health disorders. Maybe you won't use the term "I'm so OCD" anymore. And I hope for those of you listening who can really resonate with this, whether it's the constant feeling of anxiety, being in that, feeling depressed, I hope that this is helpful to you so that you can know you're not alone. And if you have OCD specifically, or if you're coming here to learn more about it, I hope this was helpful. It's certainly not going to be the last time I talk about OCD, just because it's such a persistent thing in my life. I wanted to have this more casual discussion about heavy themes, kind of explain where I'm coming from. So there is light at the end of the tunnel if you're suffering from OCD. It's not really, I don't want to pitch it as it's all doom and gloom, right? Just because it is chronic, there are many ways to lessen the anxiety, and I'm in a much better position now than I was, right? I have such a better understanding of myself and how to conquer a lot of the triggers that would normally set me off. And if I am in a state of anxiety caused by the OCD, I know how to go about things so that I'm not excessively performing compulsions. I am more easily able to silence those thoughts myself. And again, I'm going to a therapist, so we're going to talk about it more. It's really not, like, I don't want you to worry about me because, again, I've been dealing with this for so long. This is just normal to me. And really, I've gotten so far. Like, it is so much more manageable now than it was. And if you have OCD, that can be your reality. It takes a lot of work. I'm not going to lie. I'm going to be honest. It will take a lot of work. Is it fair? I don't think so. But you come out, you're making it through. If you're living with OCD, I respect the hell out of you. Just know that you are incredible and you have value to give to the world. You can tell your story. You can inspire other people. So yes, OCD is this very debilitating cognitive impairment. And your brain is literally wired differently. Through research and what my nurse practitioner has told me, in the frontal lobe, there are misfiring neurons. There are connections not being made. These pathways that make it so that I am in a constant state of fight or flight because of these obsessions. With anyone struggling with this particular mental illness or any other hidden disability, I want you to know that you are strong. That's what I want you to walk away with, this understanding, right? But that's essentially all I wanted to talk about today. There's so much more that I could say. However, I want this thing to be a reasonable length. We'll see how long it actually ends up being. So yeah, that was Thane Brain. I'll get more into how I was late diagnosed with ADHD and autism in the next episode. There's a lot that I have saved for that discussion, so tune in for that. I'll see you next time.